public life, both at national and international levels. These include his tenure as Secretary in the Ministry of Commerce, Government of India, Principal Secretary to two Prime Ministers, Mrs. Indira Gandhi and Sri Rajiv Gandhi, during some of the critical years of national governance, High Commissioner of India in London, Governor of Tamil Nadu and later Maharashtra, and several senior positions in the United Nations service. Currently, he is an elected member of the Parliament in Rajya Sabha. Dr. Alexander has also authored several books, articles and research papers. Some of his recent books include My Years with Indira Gandhi, The Perils of Democracy, India in the New Millennium, and Through the Corridors of Power. I now request Dr. Alexander to deliver the keynote address.
Respected Uparashtrapati, His Grace Mark Felix, His Grace Mark Kurilos, Reverend Dr. K.M. George, Dr. Vikas Ante, Father Paulus, and among the audience, His Grace Archbishop of Delhi, Vincent Consenza, and other representatives of Christian churches present here, members of the Parliament, distinguished guests, Reverend Fathers, members of the Indian Orthodox Church. I consider it a great privilege to have been asked to deliver this year's Paulus Margigorius lecture. At the very outset, let me, representing the Indian Orthodox Church, convey to the Uparashtrapati how deeply we appreciate and how much grateful we are for your ready response to our invitation to preside over this function and to give away the award. Baba Amte has been chosen as the recipient of this year's award. I know from my own experience of having met him in Bombay and other parts in Maharashtra that he is not physically in a position to attend any public functions for several years now. But his very distinguished son, who has been ably assisting him in his great social work, is present here on his behalf. And I am very grateful to Baba Amte for agreeing to accept the award at the hands of the Uparashtrapati. On behalf of the Orthodox Church, let me convey to Baba Amte our respectful greetings and good wishes. Looking at this vast gathering of over 1,200 people present here, I am impressed by the fact that members of the Delhi Diocese, particularly members of the Indian Orthodox Church in Delhi parishes, hold Bishop Margigorius in the highest esteem, affection and respect. She has been very close to me during the last 40 years of my life. I had known him from his days as Father Paul Verghese. My wife and I had the unique distinction and honor of having him as our guest in practically every place we have lived in India and abroad. For us, he was not merely a bishop of our church, but our mentor, guide, spiritual guru, and if I may say, without being exaggerating, a very close family friend. He spent almost 10 or 12 days with us just a few months before his demise in our Rajbhavan in Mumbai, when he was undergoing treatment and physically suffering the lowest level of sufferance, putting up capacity to put up with sufferance. I recall the conversation we had with him in those difficult days and how much he cared for me and my members of my family and tried to give us the advice relevant to the situation that we were in. When I speak of Metropolitan Paulus Mar Gregorius, I had the occasion to see him as a speaker in some of the most important Christian gatherings outside our country, in London and in New York. And I know personally the highest affection and regard that the Christian churches of the world had for him. The world Christendom, I am not exaggerating, had held him as one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century. For the Eastern Orthodox Church, or the group of the Eastern Orthodox churches, Paulus Mar Gregorius was their authentic voice and infallible interpreter of the theology of the Eastern churches. For the population of India, irrespective of the community, Paulus Mar Gregorius was one of the greatest philosophers of the modern era, and the Indian Philosophical Congress had honored him as the president of the All India Philosophical Congress. For us, members of this 2,000-year-old Indian Orthodox Church, he was much more than an archbishop, much more than a principal of a theological college, much more than just a guide and a mentor to some of us and also to the priest. He was the authentic voice of Indian Orthodox Church. In our Tubadain, during the Holy Communion, Holy Kurbana, in the 5th Tubadain, we remember some of the great patriarchs and religious leaders of the past. And there is a passage which refers to Patriarch Severius. If I take your permission, Vice President Sir, may I say that little passage in Malayalam, because in my esteem, in my calculation, that those words apply very fittingly to Paulus Mar Gregorius. And the words are, I am making my own amendment. Malankara Nasraniകളുടെ കിരീടവും വിശുദ്ധ സഭ മുഴുവന്റെയും വിവേകമുള്ള വായും തൂണും അൽഫാനും പുഷ്പങ്ങൾ കൊണ്ട് നിറഞ്ഞ മേൽച്ചിലവുമായിരുന്നു പൗലോസ് ഗ്രിഗോറിയോസ്. We continue to respect him as a spiritual leader of uncommon wisdom and vision, who kept reminding us on every occasion that we should be as proud of our country's cultural heritage and civilizational wealth and richness as we are of St. Thomas' heritage and our Orthodox identity. In the next few minutes, I wish to talk to you how Paulus Mar Gregorius interpreted the concept of Orthodox identity to the world at large. I am not claiming any originality in this. I am just following what he had tried to interpret to the world at large, what is meant by Orthodox identity. I shall deal with it in 3 segments, or refer to 3 important factors which should constitute what is known as Orthodox identity. One is the historical identity. We members of the Orthodox Church always claim the right or the legitimacy to be acknowledged as the National Church of India, based on our historic identity. What is this historical identity? Secondly, I will refer to our identity as a member of the Eastern Orthodox group of churches of the world. And thirdly, I will refer to our stand in the ecumenical movement that is now being followed all over the world. In these three compartment segments, I will deal with the subject of Orthodox identity. When I deal with the historical identity of our church, I have to call your attention to a little bit of history. For 1500 years after its establishment in AD 52, at the hands of one of the apostles of Lord Jesus Christ in Kerala, for 1500 long years, this church had never been subservient to any authority or any power outside our country. If we claim ourselves to be an Indian national church or one of the national churches of India, it is because of this fact that all through the 2000 years of our history, dating back from 52 AD, it has been a struggle on our part to remain an indigenous church, firmly rooted to the civilization of this country, the culture of this country, the ethos of the ordinary people of India. For the first time in the history of this church, we understood what is foreign domination in ecclesiastical field, or we experienced subservience to an authority outside our church with the advent of the Portuguese. The arrival of Vasco da Gama in Kerala in 1498, and later the arrival in Kerala of Archbishop Menezes from Goa, marked a major event in the history of our country as far as our historical identity as an independent entity was concerned. I do not want to go into the details because most of the details are familiar to you, most of you present here. But the fact is, as a result of the arrival of the Portuguese in India and their acquiring political power in Kerala, the occupation of Cochin as their port, they could exercise influence over this church. And through the efforts of Archbishop Menezes, they could make the church accept the Roman Catholic hegemony. But it lasted only for 54 years. In the year 1653, a very important event took place, which we always remember with great gratitude when we look back. And that is the famous oath our ancestors took by tying a rope on a granite cross at the church in Matanchere, Kochi, swearing eternal allegiance to the authority of the church in India and renouncing all connections with the Western church. From 1653, the church went back to its soul. But unfortunately, there was again a division in the church. Then for the first time, we approached the churches in the Middle East, Babylon, Jerusalem, Antioch, Persia, asking that the bishop should come to Kerala and strengthen this church on its new chapter of renewed independence. And for the first time, a bishop came from Antioch, because that was the first church which responded to our invitation. To cut a long story short, thus started our connection with the church in Antioch. But the bishops who came from Antioch occasionally, and the patriarch in Antioch, never exercised spiritual or temporal power over the church, or never tried to intervene in the affairs of the church. It happened only in 1875 with the arrival of the first patriarch from Antioch, Patriarch Peter. And then for a short period again, the church relapsed to a period of subservience to another foreign ecclesiastical authority. But by 1912, the church decided to institutionalize its independence and institutionalize its national identity. And that is how our ancestors in 1912 decided to establish the Catholicate of the East with jurisdiction over the Indian Orthodox Church. And we started claiming that we are the authentic National Church of India. Today, it is one of the most prosperous, it consists of one of the most prosperous communities in India, economically, industrially, socially, educationally. We may number only 2.5 million in the whole world, and in India particularly. But in economic, industrial, educational and social progress, we can claim ourselves to be right at the top of the Christian community in our country. I will come to the second part of my talk, and that is our identity as a member of the Eastern Orthodox Church. As everyone is aware, the world Christendom is divided into three groups. The Roman Catholic Church, which is the largest Christian group in the world, the Protestant Church and the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church is divided into two broad groups. The Byzantine Orthodox churches, the churches in Serbia, Hungary, Romania, Russia, they all come under the category of the Byzantine Orthodox churches. And the East Oriental Orthodox churches, there are only 5, and they are the Syrian Church in Damascus, the Church in Ethiopia, the Church in Egypt, and the Church in Armenia. And we are the 5th member of that small group of 5 Eastern Oriental churches. Eastern Oriental churches are located in countries which are not economically as advanced as the Western churches are, both Catholic and Protestant. And secondly, Eastern Orthodox churches had to undergo loss of sovereignty on the political field because we were all at some stage or other colonies of some power or other. And thirdly, Eastern Orthodox churches have not always been able to maintain their autonomous status. At some stage or other, they have subservient to some other power, mostly within the group of Orthodox churches themselves. Unfortunately, the contacts between us and our sister churches in Ethiopia, Egypt, Armenia have not been very regular or sustained. Each church has its own problems, and they have more problems than we in India. These 5 churches are also located in countries where the Christians constitute an insignificant minority. There again, unlike our status, though we are a very insignificant minority in India, the Christians, just 2.3% of 1 billion people in India, in our case, we have never experienced what persecution is or oppression is at the religious plane. If the Indian Christian community, here I am not speaking only of the Indian Orthodox Church, if the Indian Christian community of just consisting of 30 million people in a population of 1,000 million people can hold their head high and forget that they are a minority, if they are able to survive today as a minority without a minority complex, the credit should not come to us, the credit should go to the great Hindu community of India. We have been the recipients of not tolerance, we have been the recipients of outstretch of tolerance, encouragement, physical support, constant companionship, of the great Hindu community of this land. We should eternally be grateful to the non-Christian community, particularly the Hindu community, for the status that we have enjoyed all these years. The Indian Orthodox Church particularly should remember that we have been honored with charters of privileges and rights as early as the 8th century AD, and the copper plates are kept at the palace of His Holiness the Catholicos of the East. For those who love history, they can go and see these copper plates, where our ancestors have been given through royal charters the privileges and honors which were reserved only for a very select few in the country at that time. When other Christians in the Western countries and in the East were being hunted and persecuted, were being oppressed and driven out, or being forced to go back to their old religion, we had the experience of just the opposite. And that is why we are a minority without a minority complex in this country. That is our identity. And I now come to the last part of my talk, and that is the position of our church vis-a-vis the ecumenical movement. We have a distinct position in history which I mentioned. We have a distinct position in our relationship with the Orthodox Church I mentioned. Just as we have a unique and distinct position in these two sectors, we have a very distinct position, I may say a very different position regarding the ecumenical movement. There again, if time had permitted, I would like to go into a bit of history, but I am skipping. The position today is that we do not subscribe to the ecumenism that is generally understood by the Western churches. We have chosen a position different from the Protestant churches of the West, and we have tried to define our position with reference to our own problems, situation, aspirations, and identity in this part of the world. Unfortunately, our stand regarding ecumenism has not been properly understood by the West. The greatest champion of the distinct position of the Orthodox Church on the issue of ecumenism was Paulus Gregorius. He had convinced the churches or representatives of the West that as far as we in India are concerned, ecumenism doesn't mean only cooperation with Christian denominations in the country. We subscribe to the concept of ecumenism, according to Paulus Gregorius, in our relationship with the Christian denomination. But he always told them that as far as the Eastern churches are concerned, the Oriental Eastern churches are concerned, ecumenism should have a wider meaning, a wider connotation. Some people call it the new ecumenism. Some writers refer it to as the wider ecumenism. I would prefer to call it the wider concept of ecumenism. And that concept which we have advocated and we continue to advocate is that while we agree with the need and importance of fellowship with Christian churches in the country, we want to give equal importance to inter-religious fellowship. Paulus Gregorius had been misunderstood because he would go to the Hindu rulers. He will go to the monastery of Hindu monks. He would spend time with the Pondicherry ashram. He will hold discussions at length with the Muslim divines. But his justification for all this is that while he knows all about his own religion, he wanted to learn from the great authorities of other religions so that ecumenism in its wider concept could be practiced by us. Therefore, when we speak of ecumenism, we are not in any way departing or going out of the concept of fellowship among Christian churches, but we want to keep that fellowship and go a step further and include in our ecumenism the concept of inter-religious fellowship. A great debate was going on, and Paulus Mar Gregorius was misunderstood by the theorists of the West, particularly from the forums of the World Council of Churches, and he was criticized sharply, saying that he was departing from the Christian point of view. But if you ask what the stand of the Indian Orthodox Church is, as far as ecumenism is concerned, the answer is very simple. Yes, we fully subscribe to ecumenism, but we want that ecumenism to include other religions in our country also. That is the distinct identity of the Orthodox Church. We have a distinct historical identity. We have a distinct identity as a member of the 5 group of Eastern Orthodox churches, Oriental Orthodox churches. And we have a distinct stand, I wouldn't call it identity, as far as the concept of ecumenism is concerned. We remember on this occasion the great leader, spiritual guide, philosopher and mentor of many of us present here, Paulus Mar Gregorius, who spared no efforts always to speak out his mind on these 3 points. He has trained our thoughts in this direction. He has given the signposts where we can take it further. And I am sure representatives of our church who attend World Council of Church meetings and others, like Reverend Father K.M. George, I have no doubt in my mind they are following the path that had been laid down for us in all these 3 points by the great mentor of our church. May his memory inspire us to further great thoughts on these lines. Thank you.
Thank you.